Our lesson this morning comes to us from Matthew, and from the 20th chapter, if you want to turn there. And this is probably a fairly familiar story. Chapter, and we'll read the first 16 verses of this parable. Matthew 20. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go to work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour, he went and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one hired us," they answered. And he said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "Friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave to you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Are you envious? Because I'm generous." So the last will be first, last. And this is the word of God for the people of God. Well, this is a parable. And technically a parable is a short story, and in the short story it contains one little kernel of truth, sort of a take-home. It's a lot if you want to compare it, and I know if the comparison is fair or not, but probably all of us have heard of Poor Richard's Almanac by Benjamin Franklin. Full of pithy little sayings, but in a sense, they are like one-sentence parables. A penny saved is a... Now, you can take that and just go, penny's not worth much, I don't care. Doesn't mean much to me. Or you can think about all the stuff going on in that little sentence. The beauty of earning and saving. How important they both are. A little kernel of truth. Grapes are, if you will, kind of I hate to use the term cash crop. Maybe core crop would be better in Palestine. They were beautifully versatile, if you think about it. Just about every single part of the vine can be used. Now, of course, you think of the grapes first off, and yes, they can be eaten fresh. And they were delicious. They were sweet. But they could also be dried. And, we all know that dried grapes are raisins. And see, raisins extends the shelf life. Fresh grapes don't last too long. Raisins have a long shelf life. So there was an advantage there in dried fruit. You could also squeeze them and you would have fresh juice. Anybody like grape juice? Yeah. Have it every communion. It's good stuff. We also know it's healthy for you. The problem with fresh grape juice, even in a country like Palestine, doesn't last very long. However, better if you add a little yeast and a little sugar and let it ferment. You have wine. And that shelf life is a lot longer. It keeps longer. It depends, you know. Also, and we don't think about this very much, we say every part can be used, and it's true. In the growing process, then and now, people who keep vineyards go through there. There are shoots that grow out all year long, and the idea is if you let those things grow, then you have so much shade over the grapes that even in a place like Israel, which can be pretty arid and pretty dry during the warm climate, it has so much dew that eventually you can have a lot of loss of grapes through rot. So you go through there and you clip and you cut those branches off so that you have good air circulation and plenty of sunshine going in to the clusters of grapes. Now when you do that, and we're going to touch a little bit later on this, on the stem part of it, but you have leaves, fresh leaves. And leaves have a dual purpose. You know, you can collect all of the leaves, compost them, and then put them on the vines and help to use it as a fertilizer. But also when you're cutting those vines, you can have fresh leaves. You take them, you wet them, keep them good and moist. And then you can make up a mixture, which was done during that time. You make a mixture of meat and vegetables and some grain, and perhaps some onions and some garlic. I'm getting hungry. And you mix it up in a bowl together, and you take the good moist leaf, and you cut out the stem out of it, the heavy stem out of it, and you put that mixture in the center, and you roll it up into a grape leaf. And then you can cook it. You can steam it. You can boil it. And is there anybody here ever had grape leaves like that? I am getting hungry now. That's a good thing to eat. Now, all those branches that were cut off could be saved, stacked, and dried, and they became kindling to start fires with, fuel for fires. So, in a sense, the grapevine had everything that could be used internally for the family, and then on a large scale, like what we're talking about here, could be taken and could be traded out and swapped out, sold, and bartered for goods that you didn't have to bring into your household, or you could have some extra cash income from it. And like most orchard crops, the thing about grapes is that they tend to all ripen pretty much at the same time. And so, and that occurs today. You know, it wasn't just then, it happens then. And there's a point when, you know, then they would go through there and they would taste the grapes and they would say, all right, we've got to get them now. And even today, if you go around people who have vineyards today, it hasn't changed. The technology's changed. They use these little instruments and they prick the grapes and they, from different parts of the vineyard, and they measure the grapes and they see how much sugar's in there, and they go, you know, now we have to harvest this whole vineyard. It's ready now. And here's the thing that hasn't changed either. The time to get those grapes can be anywhere between 24 and 36 hours. You don't have time to waste. So the owner of the vineyard decides that indeed the crop is ripe. He goes to hire workers to harvest the grapes, and he goes out about dawn, about 6 in the morning. And he agrees when he goes to hire them to work in the vineyard, I'm going to pay you a denarius, standard wage for a day's work. We today would say it's analogous to our minimum wage. I don't think it's quite analogous to it, but it's pretty close. But then the difference was that a denarius was a good day's wage. It was a living wage. You didn't starve off of it. So a denarius was a fair wage. It goes at 6. At 9, he goes back and he hires more workers. He sees these people milling about. They're telling jokes, got their hands in their pockets. Some of them are smoking cigarettes. Just hanging out. They were standing there, I'm quoting here, in the marketplace, doing nothing. Now, I find that really odd because if you think about it, Israel on the latitude of the globe is not very far off from where we are here in North Carolina. Seasons are very similar. So this is harvest time. Not just grapes, but lots of stuff are maturing and ready. And yet here are these people standing around doing nothing. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I'm just wondering why that is. Maybe their economy was as bad as ours is. I don't know. So, he goes in, he sees them doing nothing. And then he says, in regards to the salary, he says to them, I will pay you what is right. I will pay you what is right. At 12, noontime, he goes back again. At 3, he goes back again. And then again at 5 o'clock, just about an hour before sunset, he goes back again. Now, we're all wondering, I know I am, I'm sure you are too, why didn't he just hire them all at dawn? I don't know. Maybe the weather was threatening, and it was getting worse as the day went on. I don't know. Maybe he discovered that as they got to work in the vineyard, the grapes were farther along than they thought. They had to work even faster. I don't know. This I do know. After the last employees were hired, they worked probably less than an hour, and the sun began to set. The owner of the vineyard calls the foreman. The foreman comes in, rings the bell. They all come in. The owner says to the foreman, he says, call the workers and pay them their wages. He says, begin with the last ones hired. You know the ones who worked about an hour. So they gather around there, and it's probably a pretty pathetic sight. I'm sure they were pretty sweaty. And they're taking their caps off and wiping the brows of the caps off, sweat off their brows. And he begins to pay them. So he takes the last of the workers and he gives to them a denarius. And you can imagine sort of the shock of those who had just been even hired at 3 o'clock, or those who'd been hired at any time. They look around and they go, a denarius? They work 1 hour, we got a denarius, a day's pay. And then they start thinking among themselves, well, my goodness gracious, if he paid them a day's wage for an hour's worth of work, what will he pay us? So now they're kind of grinning. And so the workers at 3 come, and the workers at 12 come, and the workers at 9 come, and they're all paid a denarius. And see, that's when the very last ones who were hired, the ones who have worked all day, for them, the other shoe drops. And they're handed a denarius as well, too. Now, between you and me, if I was that guy, if I was the owner of that vineyard, I'd have flipped that. I'd have paid the ones that had worked all day long first, got them out of the way. Then the next, and then the next, and then the next. And by the time I'd have whittled myself down to those who worked only 1 hour and I handed them a denarius, I wouldn't have to listen to what really happened. Because the text says, they began to grumble. That's what it says right here in the Greek, grumble. It says grumble because you really couldn't print what they said in the Bible. It wouldn't be acceptable. And you know what's worse? The landowner just seems completely unconcerned about their plight. Don't I have the right to do what I want to with my money? That's irritating. Very irritating. And we're all thinking also, that's not fair. Some of these workers have worked 12 hours. And some of these workers haven't even worked hardly an hour. Do the math. That's not fair. We know how this thing's supposed to work. Outside the vineyard that we just read about, in our own world, if I do a day's work, I get a day's pay, right? You can do like this, it's okay. It won't hurt you good. And if I don't do a day's work and you don't do a day's work, We don't get a day's pay for that, do we? No. They pay us for the hour that we work. I totally get the landowner's right to do whatever he wants to do with his money. But he looked those workers right in the eye, and he promised them, he said, I'll pay you whatever is right. But he didn't. And that's not right. In fact, there's something very wrong with that. If I'm on a school board here in Iredell County, and we want to hire a new teacher, and 2 teachers come to us, and we look at their academic records, and they both graduated with excellent grades. We look at their recommendations from their professors, glowing recommendations for both of them. And neither one of them have ever worked anywhere else before. They're brand new, and they're just going to be their first teaching job. And we like the character of both of them. They interview well. And when they step out of the room, I am in that room with those people who are on that board. Do you think I'm going to say to them, I think we ought to hire, and now listen, one of them is male and one of them is female. And do you think I'm going to say to them, well, I think we ought to hire the woman and pay her less? They would turn on me in a heartbeat because they would slap us with a lawsuit, and they should, right? One summer when I had my landscape business, I'm telling you the truth. You understand, you see, I was way back in the mountains in Sylva, North Carolina. The locals called it Sylvia, North Carolina. I had my landscape business. I had a few other people who were working with me that summer. I had a Caucasian, white, redneck worked for me. I had a Native American Sioux who worked for me. And I had an African American who worked for me. And I got to tell you, when the 4 of us went in to get a sandwich or to gas up, people looked at us. There's not a lot of ethnicity up there. Do you think that I paid the Native American and the African American less than I paid the good old redneck? No, I didn't. Because you know what? That's not fair. And that wouldn't have been right. You know what? Part of the outrage that we're all feeling here is due to our expectations. We expect to be fully compensated for our work ethics and our work efforts. The funny thing about this story, and if you still have your Bibles open, the story that precedes this story is a story about a rich young ruler. And he comes to Jesus, and he's smitten with Jesus. He says, wherever you go, I'll follow you. And Jesus looked at him and he said, okay, you go and sell all that you have and give to the poor. And the scriptures are really clear. It says he hung his head and walked away because he had great wealth. And just as he's going over the top of the hill and he's nearly out of sight, Jesus turns to his disciples and he says to them, I tell you, it will be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I don't know, over the years they have tried to dumb that down and tell us that the eye is a gate and that's what it meant. And no. Jesus meant the eye of a needle. His disciples were dumbfounded. They had high expectations. And when they heard that, they said, "Oh my! We have left everything and followed you. What do we get?" Truth is, not much. 3 years, they followed this itinerant preacher up and down dusty trails all over Israel. They've camped out in the cold and the rain. And what did they get? Mostly grief from the religious community, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes. Grief. You see, in this world, we earn our pay. And when employers don't pay us what we deserve, we feel cheated. We grumble. We don't understand, do we? God doesn't play by the same rules as the world. In God's economy, people don't get what is fair. In God's vineyard, people don't get what they deserve. They don't get what they earned. We get God's love, and we get God's grace, and we get God's mercy, and we get God's forgiveness. Not because we deserved it, and not because we earned it. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There is not one righteous, no, not one. God pays us workers in the vineyard not right, but righteously. Doesn't matter when we started. God treats us all like family. If you had 3 children, one 9 years old, one 6 years old, and one 3 years old, would you pay the 9-year-old 3 times? Pay the 9-year-old. Would you love the 9-year-old 3 times as much as you love the 3-year-old? No. That's ridiculous. Each one of them would get all the love that you could possibly give them from the bottom of your heart. That's only right. That's what families do. Now, if God can treat all the workers in His vineyard like a family, giving us what we didn't earn, what we don't deserve, shouldn't we be just as loving and graceful and forgiving and kind to each other as God has been towards us? Yeah. Turn and smile to your neighbor and say, "Well,